Welcome back. One of the unique aspects of St. Paul architecture is the number of buildings on the National Historic Register.
And one of those buildings is the Armstrong-Quinlan house, but they need to move it to make room for the transit center. Now, a lot of work goes into getting a building like this ready for such a move. So let's now take a look at some of the history of the Armstrong-Quinlan house and then some of the preparations that are being made.
The Armstrong-Quinlan house has been a part of St. Paul's landscape for over 100 years, but little remains that its former residents would recognize. The Armstrong house has new, modern neighbors, and the old house just doesn't fit in. So this month it will pack up and move to a new neighborhood.
Moving a building as old and fragile as the Armstrong-Quinlan house is a major project, one that requires lots of care and planning. The city chose to undertake the project because the house is one of the few remaining pieces from an important period in its history.
In 1873, George Washington Armstrong, Minnesota's first territorial treasurer, purchased a piece of land on the outskirts of St. Paul. By 1886, St. Paul was already an important commercial hub of the expanding frontier. The population was growing rapidly. Businesses and homes sprang up side by side, and Armstrong's property was soon on the edge of a bustling downtown residential and business neighborhood. New immigrants, often laborers or tradesmen, created a demand for affordable rental property and boarding house rooms. Recognizing the opportunity, John Milton Armstrong decided to build a residence on the land he inherited from his late brother George. Armstrong commissioned St. Paul architect Edward Payson Basford to design the building. Basford's architectural credits included several prominent St. Paul buildings. His design of the Armstrong house called for the creation of a side-by-side duplex or double house. The plans included a facade that made the two units appear as though they were a single building. The house stayed in the Armstrong family until 1943. In 1965, it became the Quinlan Nursing Home. Soon, commercial establishments overtook the neighborhood, and eventually, the distinctive house became the only residence in the area. By the late 1980s, the businesses near the house had moved out and their buildings were demolished. Fearing that a similar fate would befall the Armstrong house, advocates succeeded in placing the building on the National Register of Historic Places. Its place on the National Register protected it from being torn down. Studies exploring the feasibility of moving the century-old structure began over 10 years ago.
Various destinations and relocation methods were considered. Proposals finally became projects in the spring of 2001 when the city, through the Office of Planning and Economic Development, hired CPMI, International Chimney Corporation, and Stubbs Building Movers to begin preparing the house for the move.
CPMI was hired by the City of St. Paul to be the liaison between the city and all the various entities involved in the project. We consider ourselves in the middle of an hourglass. The city is at the top, and all the information funnels through us to all the parties that are involved in moving the house.
Primary responsibility for the preparation, transport, and relocation of the house belongs to International Chimney Corporation. The company, located in Buffalo, New York, has moved a number of historic structures around the country, including the Schubert Theater in Minneapolis.
The engineers will go in and take a look at the building and calculate its weight, center of gravity, best points to pick it up, where the steel will do the most good underneath the building, and laying out the design for the steel, the amount of dollies that go under it or have to go under it to take the weight. All these calculations have to be done before you can set foot on site, and they go in and try to figure out how the building was built and what it'll take to move it.
Stubbs Building Movers, a local company, was also involved in the Schubert Theater relocation. They've been preparing the Armstrong house since July.
Everything you see on site, the blocking, the steel beams, the dollies, the jack machine are all provided by us. and the only thing that our company actually had to rent will be the power dollies, which a friend out east has made those, and we used them also on the Schubert Theater.
Moving the house is a pretty complicated process. The movers have already put in about 3,500 hours getting the house ready. They removed every stone in the foundation, numbered it, and are storing that so that they can put it back on the new foundation in the right position. And they've also jacked up the house on steel so that they can get it ready to put it on dollies. They are also going to have to rebuild the foundation when it gets to its new home, and they'll probably spend another few thousand hours getting it reset on the new foundation.
While International Chimney and Stubbs Movers has been preparing the house for the move, Marcy Construction has been working at the destination site constructing the house's new foundation. If all goes well, the move should be completed in 9 days. To help schedule the event, planners divided the task into 4 separate stages. In Stage 1, the house will move from its current location to the intersection of Kellogg Boulevard and West 7th Street. In the second stage, the house will move down 7th to Chestnut Street. Here it will pivot 90 degrees and point down Chestnut. During Stage 3, the building will move down the sloping grade of Chestnut to Eagle Parkway. In the fourth stage, the house will pivot onto Eagle Parkway, following the curved roadway to its final resting place just east of Irvine Park.
Because of the building width, we fit just through the street that we travel on to start with, which is West 7th. But then we get to Chestnut, which is 1 block away. We have to make a rotation of the house right within the footprint of the house. And we don't have very much tolerance between the store, corners of the store and the sidewalk. The beams are going to probably come within about 5 feet of the buildings as we make that rotation. That's if we get her on the money. If we don't, we might be closer one way than the other.
When that house starts to move down the street, it and its structure are going to be about 60 feet wide, and that will mean that there's a lot of existing items on the street that have to move. So the various departments have been planning and evaluating for the last couple of months what has to move. Things such as the street lights, parking meters, fire hydrants, street signs, and all those types of things are going to have to move to get that house down the street. The Public Works Department will also be in charge of planning detours and putting signage up so people will know where they can travel on the streets.
Countless hours of planning and preparation go into a project of this size. On the next Capital City Show, we'll see how all the preparation pays off.
Well, as you can see, the contractor is progressing with moving the house. They've been working very diligently this last month, and there's a lot of work that it takes to get this house raised up. Right now, they've completed almost all the steel underneath the house and raised it almost 8 feet high into the air. Once all that steel is set, then they're going to be putting dollies under the house. There'll be about 24 dollies with almost 200 wheels that are going to be needed to roll that house. What they've been doing is being sure that this house is structurally sound and bracing it to be sure that it's going to ride gracefully down the street to its new home. As it gets ready to roll about the beginning of November, they'll be taking a couple of days to go across the parking lot, and then they're going to go across 7th and Kellogg in 1 day. They'll be heading down 7th Street, and then they will come to the intersection of Chestnut, where they'll be going to be going down a pretty steep hill down to Eagle Parkway, and its new home is going to be at 225 Eagle Parkway. At the new site at 225 Eagle Parkway, they have constructed a concrete foundation underground that the new house will sit on. This house contractor will actually be building up that foundation about 4 more feet with the stone that was originally placed under the house. And that has taken about 2 months to build that foundation, and they had to excavate and do everything they could to be sure that the house foundation is perfectly sized for this new location. This is a really interesting project. You don't get to do this very often. These big houses don't move very often in our lifetimes, and it's been a real treat to be involved with all the experts needed to work on the project.
Over the past 2 months, we've been following the Armstrong-Quinlan house. And as you may remember, the 120-year-old brick house was scheduled to move from its location near the Excel Center to its new home near Irvine Park. But the move was delayed because the building was not stable enough to make the trip. Crews reinforced the house, and by the end of October, it was ready to start down the road to its new location. It took a full day to move the building from its original location to the curbside of the intersection of Kellogg and West 7th. At that point, several city departments jumped into action.
The intersection of 7th and Kellogg was a real timing effort. They wanted to get that house across the street in one day, so all of the light poles came down at 11 o'clock on Friday night after the Wild game. They worked through the night to get those down, and they started moving the house in the morning. The house was across the intersection at about noon, and then they took the intersection and put it back together in, I think, record time. I was very impressed. It got all back together by 4:30 in the afternoon. The trip down Kellogg Boulevard went splendid. They just rolled along the street, and they went much better than anticipated. The various city departments have really been working well on this project. The traffic department, public works, traffic control have all been quite unified in getting this work done. Every day an email is sent out which tells the team what needs to happen the next day. They've been on time getting the light poles, the fire hydrants, the trees, everything out of the way when it has to be taken care of.
On West 7th, we have a 60-foot roadway curb to curb. Our cross steel, which is the longest part of the width, that was right at 60 feet, so that's the city crew came in and did a great job of taking the obstacles, which would be the street lights and the stop and go lights, out of the way. And once we got lined up on our center marks, we traveled right down that street. You always have to keep making little adjustments to try to keep it steering straight, because it does steer a lot harder than a car.
Well, it was amazing to watch. The move was incredible. The city, the coordination of all the departments was really amazing. 120 light poles came down, and trees and power, and they ran on time, and the crowds of people. The best part was seeing people who didn't come to the neighborhood to see the house and happened upon it, and the look on their face when they'd see this house rolling down West 7th. And I think it did a lot of goodwill for the city and for saving the house. Lots of positive comments about people thinking that the right thing was being done for the building.
At West 7th and Chestnut, where we had to make the building turn 90 degrees just within the boundaries of the house itself and the steel, that had been a concern all along from day one on the project, because the stores on both sides of the street, the width between the walls is 64 feet. Of course, we're at 60 feet wide. And once you do make the pivot, you don't have, we only had about 10 feet to make any adjustments before we came down through those buildings. And at the same token, we're coming over a little crown in the road and starting to drop down a 6.5% grade incline, which is fairly steep when it comes to taking a big building down. The hydraulic dollies have worked real well on this building. The biggest advantage was back at the intersection of West 7th and Chestnut, where we made that 90-degree turn, because that would have, years ago, you would have done that with a winch truck and a bunch of cable, and that would have been a tough deal to do in that intersection with all the stores around.
To be sure the house didn't slip down the hill, Larry's crew created an anchor system using 3 dump trucks, over 800 feet of cable, and several high-tension pulleys. While the movers maneuvered the building through the oversized obstacle course, another crew finished preparations on a new and improved foundation.
Well, on this foundation, they've made wider walls than the old foundation, so you do get a little bit of playroom. to spot the building in on the corners. They've engineered the foundation to handle this type of weight.
People were fascinated by the sight of the grand old building slowly making its way through the city streets.
Most days when the house has been moving, there's been a lot of people that have been very interested in coming down and taking a look. They've been quite considerate of the move, and they've not been getting in the way of the move. And it's just been very interesting hearing the comments from the people. They're really happy, on the most part, that the house has been saved and that it's moving to a new location.
The movers completed their task, but work on the Armstrong house is far from over. Local support and investment groups are planning to bring new life to the old house.
Irvin Park's been a resting place for, I think there are 10 moved houses in Irvin Park. So it's been a place where historic houses get some safe haven when the wrecking ball is calling. And so we started through the zoning process so that it could receive the house. Without zoning, the house didn't have a place to go. St. Paul's a historic town. This is the neighborhood where the city was founded. This is where the first people came. It's an appropriate place for the house, and it's good for St. Paul. We have the Science Museum, we'll have the upper landing, but this historic roots that St. Paul has makes it, you know, the great town that it is.
The development group plans to return the house to its original status as a residence.
Well, the building will be redeveloped into condominiums, and we're not sure how many. We have to work a lot on parking. Cars really drive the picture, and so we have to find places for people's cars and to figure out how many units we can get into the house, but probably 2 to 4 condominiums. But I think it looks great, and when it's all done with garages and landscaping, it's going to look fantastic. People are going to always remember the move and remember that that house could have just been turned into rubble, and the city deserves credit for that. Then we're of course fortunate that they picked us to help redevelop it. But I think it looks great up on the hill, and I think it looks better than a lot of the skeptics thought it did on that site.